by 2027. Well, there is plenty going on in Canberra, and it is time to talk federal politics with independent MP Monique Ryan, who joins us from Parliament House. Monique, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, you aren't in the business of giving advice to the Liberal Party, but do you think voters in your electorate will think that the Coalition is really committed to action on climate change if it shifts its policy from net zero by 2050 to simply net zero at some defined year, ill-defined year this century?
Well, look, I think we've had two recent federal elections where the voters of electorates like Kooyong have expressed their desire for Australian politicians to commit to and to act effectively on climate change and on environmental protections. So they'll be incredibly disappointed to see the Nationals walking away from that as they have in the last couple of days. I think the Nats are heading to net zero in terms of their own seats rather than in terms of any environmental protections and climate commitments. It's incredibly disappointing to see this. I mean, in front of Parliament this week is a really important bill, the Environmental Protections Biodiversity Conservation Bill. It's about species prevention and environment. And what we're talking about is not this incredibly important piece of legislation, which is not strong enough and which we need to hold the government to account on. We're just looking at the Liberals and the Nats turn on each other and examine their own entrails. You know, I think electorates like mine expect better from the Conservative side of politics.
Yeah, your electorate, until you won it, of course, had voted Liberal for a very, very, very long time. There's all sorts of speculation today as well that the Liberal Party could dump Susan Lee within the next 6 months or so. Does that make much sense to you?
I think people are asking what the Liberals care about, what their policies are and what their principles are. And at the moment, all they seem to care about is their own electoral prospects, which are heading towards oblivion, let's face it, if they continue to behave in the way that they have. And Susan Lee is the first female leader that the Liberals have had. She's come to power after a really disappointing campaign by Peter Dutton, where he really didn't lay out any significant policy framework. She hasn't been given a chance to show whether or not she can do that. I don't think she's been particularly impressive herself, to be honest. But, you know, people want the Conservative side of politics to have a policy platform. We've seen in Victoria for many years what happens when you don't have an effective opposition. What you have is a poor government that can do what it likes. And Australians deserve better. They need to have an effective opposition. And so I would hope that the Coalition can pull itself together in some shape or form so that it can do that, because if it doesn't, you know, electorates like Kooyong are not going to turn back to the Liberal Party. We will be joined a little later on the show by Liberal frontbencher Andrew Bragg. He is a moderate. Just to some policy now. You're from Victoria, as you sort of alluded to. How do you spend Melbourne Cup Day? Do you have a bet? I generally do have a bet, and you know, people enjoy the Cup. I'm someone who has in the past attended the Cup. I do have some concerns about it though. Yesterday in Parliament, I read a letter that I'd received from some primary school students in my electorate asking for stronger regulation around gambling advertising in Victoria. Primary school kids from Auburn South Primary were telling me that they want the government to crack down on online gambling advertising. And I know that my own 17-year-old, many of his friends have gambling accounts. I'm concerned about the impact of advertising of gambling and online gambling platforms and what the effect it's having on young people. And again, an issue that's very important to my electorate. People ask me every time I'm out in the streets to act on is the government's failure to act on the advertising of online gambling. More than 80% of Australians want the government to do this. It's more than 2 years since the Murphy report, 31 recommendations. Not one of them has been acted on as yet by the Albanese government. It's something I'm going to continue to push them on.
Yeah, years ago you used to have to go to a bookmaker or to the racetrack. Now you can bet on your couch, at the movies, on the train, late at night in bed, and many people, of course, do, and they lose their life savings. What do you think is holding the government back from taking stronger action in this area? I mean, there's sort of a blueprint ready on the table.
There's a blueprint ready to go. We could legislate it, you know, within a week. The problem is that the government is, you know, it's effectively too close to the broadcasters, it's too close to the sports companies, and it's too close to the betting companies, and we've seen lots of evidence of that in the past. You know, they're listening more to those vested interests than they are to the Australians who elected them into power. It's incredibly disappointing.
Have you been lobbied in Canberra?
have I been lobbied in Canberra? Well, I speak every day to people who want to tell me about the things that matter to them, and that is lobbying, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that vested interests like sports companies, the betting companies, do have too much influence, and that's why I reintroduced my own bill last week. Earlier this week about. It's a private member's bill about lobbying activities to regulate them better and to have greater transparency about who is meeting with ministers, where, when and why, to open up ministerial diaries and to actually enforce the lobbyist code of conduct that we have here, which is unenforced and which has the effectiveness of a wet tissue. It's a really important issue because Australians are asking why the government hasn't taken action on gambling advertising. The Prime Minister has never explained this to the Parliament to anyone's satisfaction, and it has to be because he's listening more to those people than he is to the constituents who voted him in, who care deeply about the issue of online gambling advertising.
All right, Monique Ryan joining us from Canberra. Thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure.